In 2015, a tomb outside Pylos cracked open for the first time in 3,400 years. Gold rings, ivory combs, a seal stone carved with precision archaeologists assumed only Minoan hands could produce. Every object in that grave said the same thing: Minoan. Then the lab ran the DNA. The story broke. You think you already know this case. Minoans, Mycenaeans, the birth of Greece. You've heard the names. You don't know what they actually prove. And if a DNA test ever told you Greek, Mediterranean, or even just European, this case file reaches further into you than you'd expect. Because this isn't about who died in that grave. It's about an infiltration nobody caught for 3,000 years. And once that bloodline was inside, it stopped marrying out. It started marrying in. Cousin to cousin, generation after generation, to make sure no one could ever do to them what they'd just done to someone else. We're not naming the body yet. We're telling you everything you think you know about how this civilization started and how it protected itself once it had power is about to need a new verdict. Here's the contradiction archaeologists couldn't explain for a century. Crete had a civilization first, the Minoans, sea traders, palace builders. Their capital at Knossos had no walls at all, just open courtyards, painted bulls, and a script no one has ever fully read. The mainland came later, the Mycenaeans, fortress builders, warriors. Their cities sat behind cyclopean stone walls, thick enough to survive 3,000 years of earthquakes. The first people to write Greek in a script called Linear B. Two cultures, two skylines, two completely different personalities. But under the skin, nearly identical. Both descended from the same Neolithic farmers who crossed from Anatolia around 7,000 BC. Same roots, same soil. So why did one people build open palaces and the other build walls and arm themselves to the teeth? The answer wasn't in their art, it was in their blood, and only one of them had it. Mycenaean skeletons carry something Minoan skeletons never do: a thin signature of ancestry from the Eastern European steppe. Somewhere between 4 and 16%, small, almost invisible, and completely absent on Crete. That signature has a source, the Yamnaya, nomadic herders who pushed west around 3000 BC with horses, wagons, and a language that would eventually become the ancestor of half of Europe's tongues. But here's what the textbooks get wrong. This wasn't an invasion. There's no mass grave, no burned city, no army big enough to leave that mark. A handful of men did this. Geneticists call it elite dominance. A small, mobile, powerful group arrives, marries into the existing population, and rewrites the social order without replacing a single farmer. No genocide required. Just genetics, patience, and a few generations of strategic weddings. And an entire population ends up speaking a language that wasn't theirs to begin with. This is where the grave outside Pylos stops being a mystery and starts being evidence. The Griffin warrior, buried around 1450 BC, dressed for a Minoan funeral. Gold rings, ivory, a seal stone fit for a Knossos palace. But his DNA wasn't pure Aegean. It carried that same thin steppe thread. The grave goods said Minoan. The genome said something had already changed. This is the body of the man who didn't invade Greece. He married into it. And out of that marriage came something the Minoans never had: a new language, layered quietly over the old one until it became Greek. That's Act 1 of the cover-up. Infiltration, not invasion. And it's not the only time historians assumed an army where there wasn't one. When Mycenaean palaces collapsed centuries later, ancient sources blamed the Dorians, a wave of northern invaders, swords drawn, burning everything down. For a century, that was the textbook answer. But when geneticists pulled DNA from skeletons before and after the collapse, the lineages didn't change. Same mitochondrial markers, same paternal lines. No new population arrived. The invasion left no genetic footprint at all, because there was no invasion. Once was apparently enough. Infiltration only works once, unless you protect what you took. In 2023, Researchers from the Max Planck Institute sequenced over 100 ancient genomes from Crete and the surrounding islands and reconstructed something no one had ever built before, an actual family tree from Bronze Age bones. Inside infant graves barely large enough for the bodies they held, the genetics told a story no inscription ever recorded. First and second cousins, marrying generation after generation, not in one tomb, across multiple elite family lines for centuries, written into bone instead of stone. This wasn't romance. It was architecture. Land, olive oil, grain, that was Aegean power. And power only stays in a family if the family stays closed. Every cousin marriage was a lock turned on land that might otherwise pass to outsiders through marriage. The same elite that had just shown the world how easily a bloodline could slip in through a wedding spent the next several centuries making sure it could never happen to them. They'd done it once. They weren't going to let anyone do it back. So look at what the bones actually spell out. A bloodline arrives quietly, marries in, takes power, rewrites a language, then immediately turns inward, cousin to cousin, tomb after tomb, to seal the door behind it. Two opposite strategies. Same family, same instinct. Control who gets in. And here's the part that should bother you more than the incest. It worked. The Mycenaean palaces still fell. Around 1100 BC. Plague, drought, internal collapse, not the foreign invasion the old textbooks blamed. But the bloodline didn't break. The same maternal lineages, the same paternal markers carried straight through the so-called Dark Ages. Centuries of Roman rule, Slavic migration, Ottoman occupation, and modern Greek DNA still resembles that Bronze Age signature. Diluted, layered, never erased. 3,400 years later, a tomb outside Pylos finally explains why. Power in the Aegean was never won by the sword. It was won by the wedding, and protected the same way. One marriage opened the door. Generations of marriages sealed it shut. So when historians ask why the Mycenaeans look like conquerors, but leave no trace of conquest, and why their collapse looks like an invasion that never happened, this is the answer the bones gave that the textbooks never did. There was no war to find, because there was nothing left to invade. There was only a bloodline, patient enough to marry its way into power, and paranoid enough to marry itself to keep it. And maybe that's the real inheritance. Not the language, not the palaces, the strategy. Infiltrate quietly, then close the door so tightly no one else can use the same trick twice. Every empire since has used some version of it. Royal houses across Europe married cousins for the same reason, 3,000 years later. Keep the power in, keep the outsiders out. Remember what we told you at the start. If a DNA test ever called you Greek, Mediterranean, or even just European, this case file reaches further into you than you'd expect. Now you know why. Some version of that bloodline strategy is probably sitting in your own genome too, inherited from whichever ancient elite in your ancestry played the same game and won. The wedding, then the wall. The opening, then the lockdown. It's not a Greek story. It's a human one, and it's still running. The grave outside Pylos isn't a story about ancient Greece. It's a blueprint for how power has always protected itself. And the only reason we know is because, this time, the bones outlived the lie. The next tomb hasn't been opened yet. There's no telling what verdict it's holding. If this kind of case file is your thing, subscribe. There's more buried out there.